The U.S. Department of Energy is cleaning up the Oak Ridge Reservation of residual hazardous and radioactive contamination left over as a result of decades of nuclear energy research. Much of that work has been influenced by the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup operations. You're welcome to attend the meetings and be part of this important work. For more information, call us or visit our website.
I want to say welcome to everybody. Next meeting is November the 10th.
The November meeting will be one of our off-site dinner meetings, and it will be at the Chuy's Mexican Restaurant on Kingston Pike. They have a separate room, so we'll be able to sit together and enjoy dinner together. And our presenter will be Jason Armstrong, who works for the Department of Energy in the Office of Environmental Management. He's going to talk about ensuring safe operations in the field. So that's the plan for November.
Okay, thank you, Sue. I want to go ahead and remind everybody to use their microphones during the meeting so the comments can be heard. And I have no further announcements, so comments from our Deputy Designated Federal Officer, EPA, and TDEC, and we'll start with Ms. Cange.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's nice to see everyone. I thought I might talk for a few moments this evening about opportunities for board members to go to various off-site conferences and meetings, because I think that it is a great opportunity for you all to gain a greater understanding of the DOE environmental management complex as a whole, and to meet and hear about other sites and some of their accomplishments and some of their challenges. And I would really like to encourage you all, if you haven't participated in off-site conferences or workshops, to think about it. So I just wanted to mention a couple that have just occurred that will become available next year, and a couple that are upcoming that are still open for you all to participate on. So we just had 2 weeks ago in Washington, D.C., the first Office of Environmental Management National Cleanup Workshop. And this will be an annual workshop that will be in Washington, D.C., in the August-September timeframe. So this is something to look forward to a year from now. But it was very well attended. The Secretary of Energy actually gave the opening keynote address. There were a couple of members from Congress, Congressman Fleischman, who represents the 3rd District here in Tennessee, and also Congressman Simpson, who is the chair of the House Appropriation Committee. Congressman Fleischman is the vice chair, so they were both there. And then, of course, the new Assistant Secretary, Monica Regal-Buto, offered her remarks, and Mark Whitney and a host of other people, both from headquarters and from the field sites. It was really a very interesting workshop, and it's something that I would encourage you all to look for a year from now. As far as opportunities that are coming up for you all to participate in, next month in November, there will be the annual DOE Intergovernmental Meeting. This meeting, as I said, is an annual meeting. It's sponsored by all of the various intergovernmental groups that interact with the Department of Energy with their cleanup programs. So that includes the Energy Communities Alliance, the Environmental Council of the States, the National Association of Attorneys General, the National Conference of State Legislators, the National Governors Association, and the State and Tribal Government Working Group. And it's a 2-day event, November 18th through 20th in New Orleans. If you're interested, of course, either Pete or Spence or Melissa, who's not here with us tonight, but I'm sure you have her email, can help you find additional information. And then the other conference I wanted to mention is an annual conference that is held in Phoenix, Arizona each year. This year, it's going to be the week of March 7th, and it's called the Waste Management Conference. This is probably the largest conference that the Office of Environmental Management helps to sponsor. There are literally a couple thousand people that attend, not only from the U.S., but also internationally. And this year, Oak Ridge is going to be the featured site at that conference, and we have a full day dedicated to information on the Oak Ridge site, and that'll be the second day of the conference, Tuesday, March 8th. So again, I find these workshops and conferences to be useful. I get a lot of positive feedback from SSA members that have attended and from other local community stakeholders that participate, and I just want to encourage you guys to think about it for those of you that are new as you settle into your membership jobs. So that's it.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Connie, Ms. Jones.
Thank you. I don't have any specific announcements, but I'll be glad to answer any questions if asked.
Thank you. And Mr. Sartowski.
Thank you. The only announcement I have is that we have a new division director. Andy Beamford stepped aside from the position of director, and Steve Goins, his deputy, assumed the role of the division director. Andy Beamford is going to be performing as an environmental fellow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, public comment period.
Are there any members of the public who want to comment? Okay. As the Citizens Advisory Board to the Department of Energy on environmental cleanup, we want to encourage the community at large to attend and participate in our board and committee meetings. If you are unable to attend, please send in your questions and comments to the address shown. Appropriate comments and questions will be read during the public comment section of the SSAB meeting and will be given the same consideration by the board and the DOE as those given in person. Meeting schedules and ways to communicate with the board can be obtained by calling 241-4583 or by visiting our website.
So having started late, we should move on to the presentation a little early.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. Tonight's presentation is going to be progress at the East Tennessee Technology Park. Wendy Kane is a Portfolio Federal Project Director for the Department of Energy's Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management. She is responsible for the planning and execution of EM cleanup, decontamination, and decommissioning, waste storage and disposal operations at the East Tennessee Technology Park, which is formerly known as the K-25 Gaseous Diffusion Plant. Wendy has been with DOE for over 20 years and joined the Oak Ridge Environmental Management Program in 1998. Wendy's career also included 4 years with the DOE Technical Leadership Development Program that included details at 3 field sites and a headquarters program office. Wendy has a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from West Virginia University and a master's degree in industrial engineering environmental management from the University of Tennessee. Wendy, we look forward to your presentation tonight.
Thank you, Dave. Is this working? Yes, I can tell now. All right, well, let's dive in. I'm really excited to give you an update of the things that have been happening at the East Tennessee Technology Park that I'll now refer to as ETTP, as well as some of the exciting things to come. So just as a geographical orientation for folks, we'll be talking about the ETTP, which is just west of the city of Oak Ridge. You're familiar with our environmental cleanup scope that has activities at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, Y-12 National Security Complex, and ETTP. Our end state for the East Tennessee Technology Park is to be a commercial industrial park. And we are excited as we continue to make progress towards that end. There are a few things that we need to do before we get there, though. We still have some facility demolition activities to occur. The soil cleanup and remedial actions as well as decisions for groundwater and other media. We will continue our process to make land, okay, I had a little bit of echo, I thought, maybe where I'm standing. We have the process that we continue to go through to make land available for reuse through the Community Reuse Organization of East Tennessee and transferring that property. And we have some historic preservation commitments that we will continue to pursue as part of our memorandum of agreement with our consulting parties for historic preservation. So a couple of key, I guess, markers for us in the environmental management program. The near-term vision is a recently established objective, I say recently, last year or so, objective to complete the gaseous diffusion process facilities by 2016. So when you hear Sue or other representatives of environmental management speak about Vision 2016, is to complete the gaseous diffusion process buildings. And as you're aware, we only have one of those left, the K27 building. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Our Vision 2020 is our objective to complete all of our environmental management work at the East Tennessee Technology Park. So you can see it's on the horizon. It's finally, it's close. And I can tell you, well, I had to stop when I realized in my bio, and Dave read that I'd been with the department for over 20 years. You might not guess that looking at me, but when I came to Oak Ridge, we had a Vision 2010, and this was in the 1998-2000 timeframe. We had a Vision 2010 to complete the site. And then as a part of the accelerated cleanup program and following on the successes of Rocky Flats and those objectives, we had a goal to complete ETTP by 2008. And I guess the big elephant in the room, or at the site at that time, was the K25 building. So we had lots of plans on how we wanted to do the work, but we hadn't actually tackled that big building yet. And so by completing the K25 building in 2014, that was obviously a huge feather in our cap, but when we look around the site, at that point it was a little easier to say that everything that needs to be done at ETTP we have now at least successfully done with other structures there. So there's very little new work that we don't have that experience with. And so I think for the first time, our vision is more realistic than it has ever been, and we're excited to see that come to fruition. The subsequent vision for the environmental management program is our Vision 2024, and that's to parlay our successes at ETTP while continuing our environmental management efforts at ORNL and Y12, but then moving our initiatives to facilities at those sites and furthering our environmental cleanup actions at both Y12 and ORNL. So current cleanup status at ETTP, and this picture is a little bit different than the one that was emailed out to you. We realized in looking at it that we had a few more updates to make since the version that was sent out, but your copies should be correct. You can see from this view that we have a lot of green, and the green are the facilities that have been demolished. We have, as I mentioned, one of the 5 gaseous diffusion process buildings left. That's the K27 building that is in blue. We have quite a few facilities that have been transferred or are currently under lease through the Community Reuse Organization of East Tennessee. Those are designated in orange. A couple of those that are leased are anticipated to come back into the environmental management program for disposition prior to us attaining our 2020 mission. So a little bit more about Vision 2016 and how we're going to get there. We've had a lot of steady progress on our GDP buildings at ETTP. Those of you that are familiar with the site know that we had 5 of those. The K29 building was demolished by Bechtel Jacobs in 2006. The K33 facility was demolished as part of the Recovery Act program and Latta Sharp's efforts in 2011. I've already mentioned the completion of the K25 building. Our structural demolition was complete in 2013. We finished our project activities in 2014. And we just recently completed the K31 building. And really what we were able to do through UCOR and some of the efficiencies that have been gained from the K25 building as that project was completing is we completed well ahead of our federal baseline schedule and well under cost. And so we were able to capitalize on those cost savings and that time frame to be able to pull those resources to work on the K-31 building while we were still preparing K-27 for demolition. So we have a well-qualified, trained workforce, and our objective, as funding has continued to make that possible, is to keep that workforce gainfully productive and moving toward our vision at ETTP. So the K-31 project is really a great success for us in the recent term because we hadn't anticipated to be able to pull off that project as quickly as we did. It was a little further out in our planning assumptions, and we had great support with our regulators to pull in our waste handling plan and the approval documents that we needed in order to accommodate that project while we were still working in K-27 and making that ready for demolition. So our K-27 building is almost ready to be declared incredible. And we expect that to happen later this fall, and then we will start the structural demolition. Probably, I think we'll be ready in the November, December timeframe. K-27 started demo in December, and we ended, or K-25 started and ended in December. So I'm kind of thinking there's something magic about that month, aside from Christmas, that we might be able to take advantage of and really get that project started before the holidays and the new year. We have started part of our capital work on that in removing the exterior transite. That started a little bit earlier this summer. So we are well on our way towards Vision 2016. So, moving on from our demolition aspects, I guess before I move on and talk about the remedial action, of course, once our GDPs are down, we still have over 100 facilities still left at ETTP, support structures, that aided in our uranium enrichment process over the years that will need to be demolished. And so we are currently working on our plans for how we're going to tackle those segments of facilities as our crews, from our characterization and deactivation standpoint, are finishing on K-27 so that they can help set the stage and help us be ready to move out on those smaller facilities as our resources are available. So moving on to the remedial action activities that we have at ETTP. The site is divided into two areas. It's approximately 2,200 acres in total, and the surrounding 1,400 acres we refer to as Zone 1. It's largely unimpacted area around the site, and then our main plant area we refer to as Zone 2. And that's 800 acres that was largely had our industrial activities. You can see Zone 1 is in yellow on your handouts and in the slide, and Zone 2 is in the light green. So several regulatory documents and actions have taken place over the years with respect to Zones 1 and 2. We had an interim record of decision for Zone 1 soils that was approved in 2002. And we'll talk a little bit more about the final record of decision and our efforts going forward there, because I know that's of particular interest to this group and your opportunity to provide comment during our public comment period. Our Zone 2 record of decision for soils and subsurface slabs and subsurface structures was approved in 2005, and we have been continuing our efforts to evaluate the exposure units associated with Zone 2 and document decisions as we're able there. I mentioned our final Zone 1 soils record of decision is in process, and we also have a final decision to come we call it our site-wide ROD that will address groundwater and other media. So a little bit more background on the Zone 1 interim ROD. And you've got this in your handout. I'm going to go through this material pretty quickly because we did talk in more detail about this in a SSAB meeting earlier in the year. But I did want to kind of set the stage because we'll have that opportunity as we advance on our proposed plan and as that gets approved to be able to make that available for public comment. So I mentioned an interim ROD was signed in 2002, and our goal there is unrestricted use down to 10 feet. Now, as we've carried out the actions associated with the Zone 1 ROD, they were largely effective. but we did have a few areas that our actions were not able to meet our interim ROD goals. And those are listed on page 8 in your handout there. So we had a few areas that were deferred to our final soils ROD, and that's the process that we've been working through with our regulators now. We talked previously about our Zone 1 remedial investigation and feasibility study. We did have some comments that we were resolving with our regulators, and that has since been approved, well, been approved since my previous visit here to talk about our Zone 1 actions. And so we're proceeding forward with the approval agreements that we had in place. Our proposed plan for the Zone 1 area, we're on a D3 version. We have been working comments and issues and addressing different things that have come up with our regulators in order to get to an approvable version. We have, I think, just a couple of outstanding comments that we believe we're on the cusp of resolving and anticipate issuing a D4 proposed plan later this fall, which it might change somewhat on the schedule based on approval, submittal and approval times, but we anticipate that the public comment period on that our document will be submitted and approved, and we'll have an opportunity for public comment in the December or January timeframe. So I think you have on the agenda to talk a little bit further about what type of recommendations or comments you might want to make, and this is a really good time to do that. I also think we're still lining up a trip to ETTP to tour the site, and we can focus on some of these areas that are subject to the final Zone 1 ROD as well. So the few key areas of our proposed alternative are a cover over the K770 area that will prevent exposure to some of the asbestos that we have in that area, removing a few targeted areas that have ecological risk, maintaining covers in a few of the key areas that already have established covers that are noted there on your slide, and a series of land use controls that will be maintained in those areas, or maintained, yes, in the area. So I mentioned a little bit about our path forward. Again, we have a few, I hope, last minute or final comments and issues that we'll be working. We'll be issuing our a D4 proposed plan. Once that's approved by the regulators, that will be available for an open for public comment, and then we will proceed with our record of decision schedule moving forward from that standpoint. So we do look forward to your input and insights and perspective as we move forward on our Zone 1 record of decision. I mentioned a little bit at the beginning about our end state for ETTP being a commercial industrial park, and just wanted to highlight some of the accomplishments that we've had to date in that area. Over 700 acres have gone through the title transfer process to the Community Reuse Organization of East Tennessee, and then some of those have subsequently been transferred to other independent third parties. We have 14 buildings that Crowett, we've transferred the property to Crowett, and they're used by independent entities. We still have some of the leased facilities I mentioned. Again, those all are pretty much targeted to be off-site, in support of our cleanup schedules, but they're still doing good work on-site that are not always just specific to DOE mission or supporting DOE mission, but other independent activities that help support the economic viability of our site and the community. We've also transferred some of our infrastructure to the City of Oak Ridge and other entities. However, we have a long ways to go for ETTP to be a standalone commercial industrial park in the future. And so that's going to be a key effort for us over the next several years as we work with our other stakeholders who will have the long-term interest in utilities, roads and grounds, and other infrastructure at the site that again will be maintained and attractive to commercial entities that want to come to ETTP. We have transfer packages in process for the K31 and 33 area. And I mentioned a little earlier about the success of K31. We were holding out hope that K31 would be of economic benefit, the structure itself. I mean, it's a pretty big building, nice warehouse, but the feedback that we were getting from other entities is that flat land in East Tennessee was much more valuable than the warehouse space that it would have accommodated. And so that was a key driver for us to add it to our cleanup scope. And and subsequently, there's been some interest through Crowett, not just for that area, but other areas of our site. And so the K31 and 33 area documentation is currently going through the approval process, and we are drafting documentation for approximately 400 acres around the former powerhouse and Duck Island area. So some exciting things to come as we continue our cleanup mission, also integrated with our commercial mission going forward. Then the last element of the responsibilities that we have at ETTP, I mentioned, was historic preservation. So we have been in a long process with a series of many consulting parties for historic preservation in order to demolish the structures that we needed to at ETTP because of the long-term liability and contamination concerns and others. And so in order to demolish the K25 building and other structures, we began much earlier than 2002 or 2005 when the first MOA was signed, but we've since had subsequent revisions to our memorandum of agreement and the commitments that we make to help commemorate the historical significance of the K25 building and the operations at the East Tennessee Technology Park. So a couple of the key elements of our MOA that we're in the process of carrying out now is UCOR has brought on board a subcontractor that is our professional design team and a museum professional that are helping to design an equipment building, a viewing tower, and the History Center. The History Center is unique in that it will be a partnership with the City of Oak Ridge because it will be in the old firehouse building on site that is currently owned by the City of Oak Ridge. And so that team has completed the conceptual design. We've gotten comments back from the consulting parties, and they are nearing completion of the preliminary design for all three entities or three aspects of our commitments on site. They also have some other smaller aspects of wayside exhibits and things that we anticipate will go around the perimeter of the K25 footprint, so that individuals, and they're interested in coming out to the site and going through the museum or the equipment building or viewing tower, can choose to walk or bicycle or ride around the footprint of the K25 building, stop and see little markers along the way that tell a little bit about that story. Another commitment that we are nearing completion on is the development of a virtual museum. And so we've gone through all the legwork and review with our consulting parties on the content with that, and it is going through one final review for export control information in order to make it publicly available. So we are anticipating within the next few weeks, we're hopeful that we'll be able to announce that the virtual museum is ready for you to come and learn about the things that happen at ETTP, and it really covers a much wider range than just what happened in the 40s and 50s. The feedback from our consulting parties took it back into many, many years ago, almost archaeological times for a few data points. And then it also picks up some of the activities that happened in the Cold War, as well as our more recent initiatives with the transformation of the site to an industrial park. So pretty excited to be able to have that, and just on the cusp of being able to share that with the world. So please be on the lookout for that. Finally, as we wrap up, and I thought this was a good place, we did get a preliminary question from Ed, and I thought this would be a good place to capture some of the challenges that we still have or may have at ETTP. I mentioned the benefit of having completed the K25 building. K27 is very much like K25. So we feel pretty good about understanding our scope to get there and being able to take lessons learned from K25 and apply that to our other work. The K1037 building does present some unique challenges to us in that it has classification concerns. Minimal contamination, but significant classification concerns. And so that's one area that does present a little bit of challenges. But really, most of the facilities on site, it is just a matter of being able to maintain our progress with the funding that's established. And so we do have some structures that we are completing our characterization on now. We're confirming that characterization. Some of our remedial action work, particularly in Zone 2, the areas that we have yet to have either no further action decision or to define what the scope of that cleanup work. It could change slightly based on the characterization and mostly from the extent of contamination and how much dirt we end up digging. We feel that it's roughly bound, but we have to take additional samples in order to better bind that action. We do have, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about the deteriorating facilities, not just at ETTP, but at Y12 and OR now. That's been a pretty big initiative throughout the complex. And we do have that challenge at ETTP as well. We have not had an active mission at ETTP since the mid-1980s. So we've maintained facilities, but we haven't invested in them and improving them because we didn't have an active mission. And so, we have a few facilities that we have to do a few things to make them safe enough to go into so that our workers are not put in harm's way while we prepare and plan some of the cleanup efforts. And so there's a little additional effort there, but certainly we've been in the demolition mode and planning and execution mode now for quite a while. And so that's our primary objective. But we have the deteriorating facilities that we need to be able to work with. And the balancing the budget is going to be a little bit of a challenge for us. We've got a well-qualified workforce that's trained, knows UCOR's processes and the DOE processes to get that work done. Our objective is to keep as many people that we have gainfully employed, progressing towards our Vision 2016 and Vision 2020 as we can. And so, again, very optimistic about those prospects and being able to complete ETTP. I'm not sure that there are too many people, and I guess I should be careful going on TV and with my boss sitting right here, but I'm really excited about the prospect of working myself out of a job. I'm not sure about Sue, but I am really excited about that prospect. And, we don't have that opportunity very often in DOE, and so it's a special time to be associated with ETTP and the Oak Ridge Environmental Management Cleanup Program. So with that, that's all I've got prepared, and I'll be happy to tackle any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Wendy.
Sure.
I'm going to work my way around the room in this direction, and since the tent went up next to me, give the floor to Dave.
Well, thank you. Excellent presentation. If the board wanted to learn a little bit more about the historical preservation activities at ETTP, somebody from the board wrote a little article and stuck it in the Advocate, which gives you a good thumbnail sketch on it. But my primary question right now is, do you think now might be an opportune time to talk about the airport?
I'm going to defer that. It could be, sure.
I can give you just a real quick summary.
Well, give it to them. All right, thank you.
I won't even look at you, Dave. I'll kind of look around.
Nice haircut.
Well, the airport is still very much a live idea on the part of the folk who are promoting it. The Metropolitan Knoxville Airport Authority is pushing along and having general success on the long journey towards the construction of an airport. DOE, for its part, has completed it's called an environmental assessment, basically a National Environmental Policy Act requirement to look at the implications of transferring the land for use as an airport. Held a public meeting in this room about a month and a half ago. We did receive a fair amount of comments on the idea, some supportive, some worried, resisting the idea of an airport. Those that had concerns were primarily focused on potential noise impacts or their perception of noise impacts, particularly in their neighborhoods, and we're working through those with them. Our analysis generally indicated that there aren't significant impacts on the noise front or environmental front. So we likely, I mean, we'll know after we've completed the evaluation of all comments and responded to them, but we likely will be moving towards transfer of the property, if they still want it, to the Metropolitan Knoxville Airport Authority. They're beginning to invest some of their own money. They've actually done a little bit of drilling on the site to better understand the depth of bedrock so they can understand what cut and fill would be required to construct an airport. And of course, they're doing what they can to identify potential funding sources to minimize the ask that they would have to make the Federal Aviation Administration. So I'd say over the next few months, we'll probably see more progress towards the direction of building an airport. That's the deal.
Thank you. That'd be a great use of a lot of land out there.
It's land that probably couldn't be used for much else. And again, there are a lot of people who are interested in the airport. I mean, the MKA and FAA have done their studies and concluded that there will be, over the next 10 years, need for additional, what they call general aviation airport capacity in the area. So,
As I understand, it will not be a regular commercial airport. It'll be just more for general aviation.
right, it's not an airport where you could fly Delta to
Yeah,
Miami.
right.
It would be a significant facility. It'd be a 5,000-foot runway, which means you can land small jets. Technically, you could land a 737, a very light and powerful 737. But it's not being set up for commercial flights, passenger flights. Now, it would be set up for commercial cargo type activity. Charter activities could operate out of there. So it's not a minor, it's not a grass runway out in the country. It would be a significant facility, employ a few people and be available for a fairly broad range of small to mid-sized planes.
And the call signs would be GDP. Thank you.
Could be.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Greg.
Dave, approximately, where were they going to put the airport?
It would be about 5,000 feet that ran approximately from around here somewhere, up to around here somewhere.
Point out some of the features like Highway 95.
Sure. This is the Oak Ridge Turnpike. It would not be touched. To touch it would be very expensive.
Right.
Possibly
No, I
a good
just-
idea. This is the haul route. And depending on the orientation they employ, they will probably need to reconfigure the haul route. Now, our mission cannot be negatively impacted. We've got to have that haul route to finish and clean up the site. So we'll be coordinating, if necessary, to ensure that we have an alternate route available. This is Blair Road. Hold on a second. Yeah, actually it comes like this, but that's Blair Road. That's the one that would take you off towards the Sugar Grove Valley and so forth. And it would likely need to be reconfigured also. So if the airport is built, that would probably either be rerun through the park, was one consideration. The State Department of Transportation has actually been very helpful in evaluating potential alternatives. And they like the idea actually of running it around this way. Which
Would it-
surprised me, but that was.
Would it use any of that land to the northeast of Blair Road?
No, not really.
You're right, up there?
There's actually there's a small area here called, it's referred to as the Wheat Historic District. It's a very nice old church there with a group of people who are very interested in the preservation of that church. So the airport alignment would not impact that.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Continuing around the table.
When you finish one of these demolitions under budget ahead of time, does that money carry over into the next budget, or does it have to be used during that year?
It carries over for use on site. And
Okay,
so,
good.
largely that's why we try to stay ahead of the game and have other projects teed up and ready to go. Because we try not to have a significant carryover. Now, it's helpful in issues like now where we're in the middle of a continuing resolution to have a little bit extra that we need for continuity of operations. But our objective is to keep that cleanup money productively engaged, so.
The second one, when you were talking about a standalone park for industrial development, and you're interested in turning over the land to industrial use, How are you going to maintain, this is something I think I've asked Dave maybe before, how are you going to maintain this 10-foot problem of use or the kind of things that some industries might need to do, even accidentally, they may go below 10 feet, or they may try to do it surreptitiously. How do you intend to, in the long term, handle that kind of thing?
I'm going to try and answer that for you too, Bob. First of all, one thing we've already done across the lion's share of the site is to show that there has been no history of industrial use, and there's no reason to assume there's a problem. So a good portion of the site, we ultimately will likely be able to lift that 10-foot restriction on, the conservation areas, et cetera. But we'll have to do that with our partners, the regulatory agencies and so forth. For the areas where these restrictions need to be in place to ensure that our public health objectives are met, we will be placing into the deed the real estate instrument that transfers this property to Crowett, and then from it would carry on to subsequent owners, a prohibition on use below 10 feet unless they have gone through something we call an excavation penetration permitting process, which DOE will still own. Right now, our contractor for management, but in theory, we end up with no or minimal DOE contractors on the site. But ultimately, DOE will be responsible for permitting the safe use of land below the 10-foot zone.
Okay.
That's part of it. And then the final thing is that for our entire reservation, you're familiar with this program we have called the Remediation Effectiveness Report and the 5-year review process. And that basically involves going out and checking up on remedies we've put in place to make sure that people aren't straying from the institutional requirements, amongst other things that have been put in place for remedies. So we think it's a pretty solid approach to making sure that people are kept out of harm's way. It's not a unique problem to the East Tennessee Technology Park. Of course, brownfields across the country have subsurface infrastructure with power lines and natural gas and energized lines and so forth. So our challenge isn't unique. We just have to do a good job of managing it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Connie?
I just have one question, and it's maybe somewhat a minor one, but there are still some areas that Wendy pointed out still need some assessment within ETTP close to the area where the proposed airport would be located, and they may not be large areas that would need to be assessed. In the evaluation, the environmental assessment aspect of it, have you evaluated the potential impact in terms of the operation of the airport if it would be constructed and operating at that time in conjunction with implementing remedial actions?
So I believe all of the areas around the exposure units that are subject to or of interest to the airport have been cleared. We do have some others that, oh no, that's not going to help without the overlay on it. So I was hoping it might, but that's not going to help. So I mean, we would not have been able to get through our transfer process.
It's correct that the entire footprint that the airport will be doing their thing in for construction purposes has gone through the clean bill of health process, for lack of a better term. There are areas maybe a few thousand feet away to the north that I think you're referring to that have not yet gone through the entire circle process. And we actually looked at that as part of, as part of the NEPA activity, looked at whether or not any DOE mission would be disrupted by the construction or operation of an airport, and concluded we'd be good. It'd be good. Ultimately, if there's a competition for a roadway for a brief period of time, or some space or utilities, we would have to coordinate with the constructors of the airport. But we don't see any battling bulldozers of any kind. So.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Ed?
Thank you. Great presentation, Wendy.
Thank you.
See, I've got a couple of things here. On the slide number 3, you talked about Vision 2016. has it already started? Have you done anything on this yet?
So-
The completion of the GDP or GDP building?
So certainly, so the Vision 2016 is to complete all of the GDPs at ETTP. And so 4 of the 5 GDP
Gone.
buildings
Okay.
are gone, and we've done most of our internal work on the K-27 building, the last of the 5 gaseous diffusion process facilities. We began our external transite removal this summer, and we expect to start the structural demolition this winter. So
Sort
we're
of
right
like-
on the cusp.
Sort of like the easy part.
What's
Or
that?
the easier part.
What-
And then
Wouldn't go there
lastly,
yet.
lastly, on slide 5, you talk about, not 5, but 6, that the second to last bullet talks about Zone 1 final source rod in progress. Is the schedule for these, or for this final source rod is part of the vision schedule?
So that's part of our Vision 2020 and some of the work that we need to do to support completing all of the ETTP scope. And so I've captured the next steps on, I think it's slide 11, the next steps for us to proceed with the Zone 1 final soils rod.
One follows the other, right? The rod has to be done before you do any work? Is that the way it goes?
So we've completed remedial actions from our interim record of decision. This will be the last piece or the last word on any subsequent actions where we were not able to meet our objectives.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
I can share with you something about the airport. In the 50s, we had massive increases in the gaseous diffusion plants. And during that time, we had helicopter service between Oak Ridge and the Knoxville airport. You got there in half an hour, included all the Mickey Mouse that goes with it. That was great. And none of the plans for an airport in town are going to provide that kind of service. The second thing I'd like to share with you is the fact that when it came to K-25's missions, one of the most important missions we had was to provide slightly enriched uranium for power reactors. That seems to have been forgotten. It went on simultaneously with the effort to provide large quantities of weapons material, but there wasn't that big a difference in the amount of separative work required for the weapons material.
That is a part of the story that you'll see in the virtual museum and in our efforts with the historic preservation structures that will be at ETTP, certainly.
And the other thing is a question. You seem to have 2 organizations independently, and I don't know if you're talking to each other, working on historical preservation. You folks and the people that are concerned with the historical park.
So I did forget to highlight that portion
Would you
of.
comment on that?
Sure, and then I'll open, because Sue may have some additional comments to make. I did forget to mention, as part of the slide that we had on historic preservation, that our commitments at ETTP are independent of the National Park Service. We have certainly, through part of our communication and coordination between the Department of Energy here locally and at headquarters with the Department of Interior, they've been very much interested in our efforts at ETTP, because I think it provides an opportunity for a quick win for the National Park Service, working in coordination with one another. I don't know, Sue, if there's anything else that you'd like to elaborate.
Yeah, No, I think that answers it. I think the bottom line is that we have been working with the other program offices here in Oak Ridge and with the National Park Service to make sure that everything we do at ETTP could be incorporated into the national park if the Park Service elects to do so. They are actually one of the consulting parties in our memorandum of agreement for the work that we're doing at the East Tennessee Technology Park.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Bob. Appreciated your insights and also very good question. Sorry, Bill. Can't see you behind the pillar. Okay.
That's it, right?
Exit stage.
Yes, thank you very much, Wendy. We'll let you off the hook now. Right. Okay, well, that completes our section of the program with presentations and questions and answer. All right, so we're now going to discuss the recommendation on the preferred alternative for the proposed plan for water treatment at Outfall 200 at Y12 National Security Complex. Appreciate Ed having put this together. We had presentations last month, and we have a copy of the recommendation in your handouts. So I want to see if there is any further discussion. Okay, Ed, if you want to give us a quick brief on this, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. First off, I think the plan was a pretty comprehensive plan. And I know the mercury problem had been lingering on for some time, and I'm glad that this plan is now written. And the objectives, of course, are the cleanup of the Y12 are to reduce the mercury in surface water and stabilize or eliminate the mercury in the soils. So the plan is to build this particular treatment facility at Outfall 200 that basically collects the water from the west and the western mercury area. So the proposed plan included two alternatives, and the first one being, of course, the no-action alternative. Alternative number two basically had other alternatives included as sub-alternatives, I call them, and DOE basically recommended alternative to 2C. And that was water treatment at the Outfall 200 with 300 gallons per minute treatment capacity and 2 million gallons of stormwater storage, which be treated slowly as the load permitted it. And our recommendation was to basically alternative 2C in the proposed water treatment of Outfall 200 at the construction of this treatment facility near Outfall 200 to manage this upper East Fork Creek upstream of 40,000 gallons per minute. The comment that I've discussed with some of you folks was that the adaptive management strategy is very reasonable, and with modularization being part of the design, construction, and operational process revisions and/or additions to the treatment system may be necessary. And this is almost like going on a lump sum project that you don't know what you're going to find, and the modularization process allows you to basically deal with whatever you may find later on. So that was basically the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion?
Yeah, I'd just like to add that the recommendation that we are going with is what the cleanup people want to go with also. We're just supporting what their plan is.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Well, no, that was.
You have
Yeah.
a question?
Any questions? That's fine. Comments are good too. Questions, comments. Anyone else? Bob?
Yeah, this recommendation put together very nicely by Ed is an outgrowth of the discussion that we had last month at the EMS committee meeting. And so there was a draft available there for us to talk about. We did, we revised it. And so what you see presented tonight is the revision of that following the presentation from last month's board meeting and then the discussion that followed up at the EMS meeting. So I think Ed has done a really good job in putting that together.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Would like to ask if someone would like to make a motion to approve our recommendation.
So move.
Okay, that sounds like Bob. And a seconder?
Second.
Seconder Greg. Okay. And discussion period is over. So let's go ahead and vote for the motion. Those in favor, raise your right hand. Would like to give Mary the opportunity on the phone. Okay, Mary approved too. Okay, passes. Thank you very much. Okay, our next item on the agenda is the SSAB Chair's recommendation on supplemental environmental projects. I'm going to have Dave discuss this.
Thank you. Once again, command the microphone and try and do this the best I can. At the chairs meetings, we get together and we will discuss problems and conditions and situations that are common to all of the site-specific advisory boards, something that's going to affect all of us at some time down the road or may already have. These recommendations are either it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down. There's no wordsmithing, no changing of any of the wording or any of the ideas in it. So it's either it's a go or no go vote on this. But the background is that some of the sites are under very, very severe regulatory milestones that they're having trouble obtaining because of conditions well beyond their control and in some cases well beyond the state's borders. Some of the regulators in other states aren't as kind as ours. They get a little bit feisty when things don't happen. And they do have the power of the fine. And if you lay down a fine on one of the EM sites, that's really just taking money from cleanup activities and putting it into a general fund of another entity. What the supplemental environmental project recommendation basically is when everything really starts to come down to we're going to fine you, we can't do it, we're going to fine you because you can't do it. Let us look at a supplemental environmental project at our site in lieu of a monetary punitive or monetary damages. Allow the site to do something that is beneficial to the health and welfare and the cleanup of that affected site rather than laying down a fine and taking that money out of the EM program. That's basically what it's about. Are there any questions? Yes, Ed.
Hi, Dave. I have a couple of, it was curious enough for me to think about this. First, the fines are in addition to whatever, if this project, X project, comes to a halt, there's supposedly some money on that project, right? For work that hasn't been done. But the fine is in addition to anything else. It's a fine by itself. So my curiosity tells me, do we use the money that was actually left in the project because it wasn't completed or it was stopped? Or is an additional extra money coming from somewhere?
I'm going to defer that a little bit. I don't want to answer that because I might be wrong, but I have an idea, but I'll let
I think
Mr.
I can
Adler
help.
answer that.
EPA actually issued a policy, and the state of Tennessee has issued policies on how to implement these SEPs, supplemental environmental projects. They specifically require that the project you engage in be a project that you wouldn't have been doing anyway. So, for example, if we were say we picked up a $75,000 fine for some mistake, we're not allowed to call knocking down another one of Wendy's buildings for $75,000 a SEP. It has to be something independent of what we already would have done. Now, to get at your question, ultimately, all this money comes from the treasury. It comes from the federal government and is appropriated. So ultimately, it's a one source of funding. So arguably, money spent on fines is money not spent on projects. but we're definitely not allowed to take money from a project, spend it on another project, and call it a supplemental environmental project.
The U.S. Department of Energy is cleaning up the Oak Ridge Reservation of residual hazardous and radioactive contamination left over as a result of decades of nuclear energy research. Much of that work has been influenced by the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup operations. You're welcome to attend the meetings and be part of this important work. For more information, call us or visit our website.